All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. A very special catching up with Jacob because it's St. Patrick's Day, and we got Jacob Prash here, not necessarily from Ireland, but from the other side of the Atlantic. Jacob Prash, how are you, Jacob?
I'm okay. I spoke to the Moriel branch in Ireland today, the land of my mother's ancestors, and we wish all of our Irish friends a very happy St. Patrick's Day. I only wish more Irish people believed what he believed, which is the gospel.
Amen. Amen. That's good. That's good. And down in the South, well, it's considered the South now, and in the United States, Southern states, David Lister, how are you, David?
I'm doing really well today, rested from the fellowship drive that went extraordinarily well, and looking forward to the next one, but ready for catching up today.
Praise God. And behind the control rooms, Jay, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing well. Good to be here.
And you're controlling all the controls and all the hot buttons right there. You got them all.
I do.
You're the most
good or
important
ill.
man. Yeah, you're the most important man in this call, because you can make it go, or you can make it not go.
It's a lot of responsibility, but the Lord is going to help me with it, I'm sure.
Amen. And down under, way down under, Davey, how are you today from Australia?
Good, thank you, Marco.
Well, you guys are back in the control room, so the rest of us here in the front room. So let's make it happen for the Lord. Jacob, glad you're there.
Good to be here.
Just want to remind you that we got the podcast schedule, and podcast is going really well. Got some new shows coming out, and in particular, Ken's Corner. It's gone out, and hopefully he does well. And there's a lot of NAR talk, a lot of stuff that is going on with the New Apostolic Reformation. So hopefully we can add to what's already a wonderful library of Moriel teaching. So that's
Amen.
Going well. We appreciate Ken for that. Jacob, I'm not going to ask you to tell us an Irish joke. We'll move on to the backstage for that. But I did want to talk about another story. The drone that was supposedly shot down over the Black Sea. It was a U.S. drone. It was a Reaper drone, about $15 million for that drone. U.S. claims it was shot down by the Russian Air Force. Russia says it was the U.S. was deliberately spying and bringing it over the Black Sea, and had some malfunctions and eventually crashed into the Black Sea. The Russian Navy is retrieving it. They have found it, and they are retrieving it. It's a complete loss, kind of a mess situation. But I think what's messier, I should say, it's what the response has been, especially from the Republican Party. Lindsey Graham calling for war, calling for what Ronald Reagan would do is shoot down Russian Air Force if they get close to our drones. All these rhetoric, all these losses, all these millions of dollars being invested in Russian technology, war technology, and it's gotten us nowhere. These are warmongers, but nonetheless, it is a war that seems to be. We're at the precipice of this. What's your take on all this?
Well, first of all, this week, Governor DeSantis, whether we agree with him or disagree with him, hurt his prospects politically within the Republican Party. Some of the rhinos have been criticizing his comments on Ukraine, calling basically for less American involvement, almost bordering on that. So this is a problem. There is a division within the Republican Party, not just between the rhinos and conservatives, but between some conservatives and other conservatives. So the Ukraine war is, of course, a point of division within the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is basically united on back of the present efforts of Biden. But the fact that the Russians were able to retrieve this reconnaissance vehicle so quickly, where was the American Navy? Where was Biden? The first reports were that a Russian fighter jet nipped the propeller and caused it to crash. Nipped the propeller, causing it to crash. But that took place over international airspace, over international waters and international airspace. There was nothing wrong with conducting reconnaissance missions in international airspace. It does represent Russian aggression, and it is a picture of Biden's weakness. no matter how we respond to it. This is showing that there is division within the Republican Party on foreign policy. And it will be a weakness the Democrats can exploit because they are united. Again, most Democrats are people who believe whatever they're told by the mainstream media. Anyway, they don't think, or most of them don't know how to think for themselves even, probably. So this is an issue. This is definitely an issue.
The David Lister, the media, both on the left and to the right, and I'm calling out Sean Hannity here, which a lot of people like to listen to him. He's been calling for 6 months for aggression into Russia. This is crazy. Why are they beating the war drum so much? And of course, Lindsey Graham goes in there, spews his his warmonger ideas, calling on the spirit of Ronald Reagan per se. He didn't say that specifically, but what would Ronald Reagan do? What would Ronald Reagan do? He said, "We'll shoot down Russian jets from the air." Why is the right media, the right-wing media, so willing to go to war when it's been shown that, as we have put it here, they're both evil? It's nothing to do with the U.S. It's a NATO thing, but yet we have to be supportive of that, and we fund a lot of the NATO stuff. So what's your take on this, the right-wing media as well as the left-wing media?
Well, I've always believed Hannity to be a rhino, and he'll nose up to anybody that's in power, going all the way back to Bush. And so I don't think much of Hannity. I don't watch Hannity, but the media is just pushing. I mean, for Republicans to be calling for war when we're as weak as we are, all of our ammunition supplies are low, will take years to redo. A hot war with Russia would end very badly with us, and any land invasion that we try to hold off will just not go well for us. The sensitivity of our troops versus the brutality of Russians and Chinese we now know have been supplying weapons to Russia. Will just
for
not
sure.
go. We're at the weakest we've ever been. It will take us years to rebuild all the ammunition and supplies we need to handle a live war. They've lost their minds.
China has green-lighted the invasion into Ukraine, no doubt, and they've been supplying, weapons into them. That's no question now. And China seems to be wanting to govern the new global governance, wants to be the leader of that. But at the same time, you have NATO, you have Russia, you have Ukraine, you have the US, you have the EU. This seems to be like an all-out war, not including Taiwan, not including Iran. What do you think, Jacob's going to come out of this? I mean, we're at the precipice and we keep inching. Seems like every week we are in more of a desperate situation, and yet not many. David Lister says some politicians on the right have called for peace, and to a certain degree, maybe Trump has, maybe a couple of Republicans have, but for the most part, this is a war that I think a lot of people want.
It is a war a lot of people want for a lot of different reasons. There's no uniformity as to their motives for wanting the war. Different political factions want it for different reasons. Obviously, China greenlighting is China is wanting to divert attention away from Taiwan and wants Western preoccupation with what's happening in Europe in order to keep a similar effort from taking place in Taiwan. With the present situation, the United States and the West could not support Taiwan the way it is presently supporting Ukraine. They just couldn't do it with tactical weapons. The only prospect is to go to weapons of mass destruction. It's going to a precipice. On that, I agree with Donald Trump. It is a more dangerous situation than the mainstream media are reporting. Although I am no longer a supporter of Mr. Trump because of his pro-homosexual gala position, he's still quite right on a number of economic and foreign relations and international security issues. And that is one of them. It is quite dangerous. You cannot show weakness to Putin, but either can you show aggression. What I've been saying from the beginning is you have to create an incentive for both sides to negotiate and end this. and nobody is playing the statesman, although China might like
No.
to.
No states.
Now, I'm going to ask you this, Nord Stream pipeline 2. We saw the basically the bombing of it underneath the water. We have been told by a very good journalist, Seymour Hersh, that it was the U.S. Deep state. We have French politicians and Euro politicians saying it was to the interest of the United States. Russia's wanting an investigation. China's wanting an investigation. The UN doesn't want to do one. This could be an act of war if it was done by U.S. operatives. Now, the New York Times reported that it was a pro-Ukrainian group that sabotaged the pipelines. Do we believe this story? Do we believe Seymour Hersh? What's our take here?
Okay, first of
Jacob,
all,
go first.
Seymour
I'll go to
Hersh-
David after.
Oh, me or?
Oh no, I'll go with you, Jacob, and then I'll go to David.
Seymour Hersh is a very competent journalist, but he's also a biased one. Not that his facts are wrongly reported, but he does have an anti-American bias, and a lot of what he writes editorially. He's not conservative or particularly much of a patriot in terms of favoring America's position in international relations, although he is a competent journalist. That must be granted. If the United States did it, it is unthinkable it did not do it without the knowledge of Great Britain and probably or possibly Israel, but certainly Great Britain. Okay. It is also difficult to believe that the NATO High Command did not know about it. And the chiefs of state of other major NATO powers did not know about it. I find it difficult to say the United States did it surreptitiously without some kind of impetus, without some kind of not just impetus, but some kind of knowledge of other powers, particularly Britain and at least some people in NATO. That is cut and dry. I don't think that can be contested. But what you're seeing now is disinformation. The deep state knows how to generate disinformation. It could have been him, it could have been him, it could have been him. You create so many possibilities of other people with motives that you wind up with what they're looking for. Plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is what they're going for. Same as a crooked lawyer. Same as a crooked lawyer. They know the client is guilty, but they're looking to create plausible deniability. That's what's happening.
David, what some European politicians are calling their own countries, especially the one in France, saying you need to investigate this because if the U.S. is involved in this, this is for their own interest. Now, granted, there's a lot of issues in Europe and a lot of things that, as Jacob pointed out, it probably could have been done in conjunction with other governments. But is this an act of war?
Certainly, if the United States has done this, or if Ukraine did this at the behest of our deep state, the CIA, etc., then it is an act of war. And Russia would be right to stop our drones, stop our planes, do whatever. So that's right. But we see Europe is fracturing again. They're lining up, they're divided. And then you've got Germany. They were in a treaty with Russia to supply energy. And now they're paying out lots of money for energy this year, which is hurting their budgets and things like this. But we also have further infighting within NATO with the entry of Finland, et cetera, coming in, and Turkey not sure if they're going to give approval. So we're weak on our army, but also our allies are weak and divided. So we're in a mess. It's almost like God is just, if I look at this from God's, it looks like somebody has put a hook in the nose of all these countries and are pulling us to a bad conclusion.
Yeah, you wouldn't be too far from Ezekiel 38. I would put hooks in the jaws of Gog and coming in. Now, I want to switch, not the topic, but the location. You have the Iranian forces, the Revolutionary Guard, going on high alert. The entire armed forces going on high alert this weekend. They're calling it basically and to some degree, they believe Israel's ready to pounce, ready to pounce. Now, the IDF chief says the campaign against the Iran's nuclear project has already begun in some dimensions, meaning that they have already done some strikes. They already have some possibility of destroying some of their facilities. This is gearing up to be a hot summer, if not already started. The border issue with Azerbaijan and Armenia seems to be diverting a lot of the media, people's eyes from that. But it may be just a diversion at the moment. Jacob, Azerbaijan, Armenia going at it, but the real issue seems to be Iran. Israel may have to strike. It's what a lot of people believe, whether or not the U.S. is giving them the green light or not. I don't know if that's ultimately going to work in favor of Israel if the U.S. is disapproving, but China seems to be the active reform global governance now. So do they have to get permission from China now? How is this shaping up?
Iran would basically, to step up any kind of a confrontation, need the cooperation of both Russia and China. This is for sure. But let's look at the entire situation. One, practical solutions to what's happening. For instance, a conflict in the Gulf would drive up the price of oil. The most simple solution is United States to go for quick energy independence, reversing the policies of the Biden administration. That would neutralize part of the problems that they're having in Europe and Germany with the fuel prices and other European countries. That would certainly help the domestic situation in the United States, and that would help assuage the power or help reduce the economic power of Iran, of Saudi Arabia, who are now moving closer to Iran, and of Venezuela. But anything that the Biden administration can do to hurt the United States, it seems the Biden administration does. The real enemy of them, if I was to line up the enemies of America and who are the biggest threats and the enemies of Israel, I would put the Biden administration on top of the list, because unless we have a American government that's pro-American, you're not going to have one that's pro-Israel. Biden is not even pro-America. He's anti-America in effect in his policies. Therefore, and he's on China's payroll anyway. So it would seem, with his son, just more disclosures today of his son getting this money. Biden, of course, lied and said he does not benefit from his son's business deals, and he does. And now there's more news today. Why is the Congress not investigating and the Justice Department not investigating the Biden family criminally, and for the possibility of espionage in the White House, the Biden administration being compromised? So there's a lot more happening here than what you see just with Iran and Israel. Secondly, watch Nasrallah in Lebanon. Nasrallah, who leads Hezbollah. Watch what he's saying. He is saying that we can capitalize on the internal political divisions in Israel over judicial reform to make advantages for ourselves now, because Israel is divided. You've got reserve pilots refusing to do the reserve training. You've got military officers signing protests. You have a disunity within the IDF, the Israeli military, and Nasrallah, who's an Israel watcher on behalf of radical Islam, knows this better than anybody, and he said so. The third,
we're going to come back to Israel and Hezbollah at the end. That's a very important factor.
The third factor is this: wagging the dog. Don't think that Netanyahu was not smart enough to wag the dog. He has these internal divisions over judicial reform. It's affecting the military. It's affecting military morale, military readiness, military training. Do not think he would not engineer a conflict or capitalize on what Iran is doing. He wouldn't even have to engineer the conflict, respond to the conflict in such a way as he can quell internal political dissent and division, particularly within the military. So those three factors have to be observed. The Biden family, the Biden regime is no friend of Israel because it's not a friend of America. But we will come to Nasrallah, as you say, but also watch the issue of Israel's internal factions turning on each other now, even within the military, over judicial reform.
China, Russia, Iran holding joint military drills in the Gulf of Oman starting Wednesday all the way to the 19th. U.S. officials have said we're not that concerned. David Lister, Should we be that concerned? I'm sure they are, but they're playing the card as if they're not. They'll monitor it, they said, but nothing to see here.
Oh, I guess the resetting of the whole Middle East situation and the powers that are pulling the strings and is nothing to worry about, shows you the insanity of our military and our leaders. The whole thing is being reset.
Yeah.
America is not a power in the Middle East anymore. Who's talking to us?
Yeah.
You know,
Look what yeah, go ahead.
sorry, if we retained our oil independence, it might not be as big as an issue as it's going to be. It might not be if we retained that, but of course Biden gave that away. I'd also point out that the week before last, there was similar naval exercises with China, Russia, and South Africa.
Yep.
Yeah.
A great
Xi Jinping-
reset is happening.
Xi Jinping says just on Monday at his legislative session for the Communist Party that he is and going to be, and China will be, the very active in reforming global governance, beginning with the Middle East. So you see them moving in that direction. And Iran, Saudi Arabia, diplomatic ties are united again. Beijing is utilizing this in a long-awaited opening to undermine American-dominated region, which has been the Middle East. So more to come, I would imagine, more to come. But I want to tie this together with another war. This is a fiscal war. What's going on in the banking industry? And we'll come back and tie this together at the end, because I think they're not mutually exclusive, but mutually tied together, what's going on in the war and the economy. You wake up one day, banks are ordered to shut down, all ATMs and debit cards are offline. What do you do? That scenario, it's being played out right now within the US because several banks are in trouble. Now, 3 of them, maybe 5 of them now, have been bailed out at the moment, but more money coming in. That precisely could happen. And this is not a scenario where that can never happen to me. People have gone into banks, especially SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, bank runs all over the world. We've been seeing bank runs all over the world for some time now. China, the Middle East, Greece, now it's the US. People need to be ready for something that's changing. And that is the whole banking system is changing. The whole economy is about to change. It will be my point. It'd be engineer, but the feds are announcing big bailouts to address the collapse. Jacob Prash, we'll go to you. Biden announces big reforms in banks. He says nothing to worry about. We're going to have a backstop now. It's not going to be a bailout. It's going to be a backstop. We're going to cover all the deposits from SVB. By the way, they've come under the federal government now. They're part of the federal government. HSBC wants to buy it. The White House says no. We know they're woke. We know they're very, very leftist. I guess the money is going to the people that they like. But where do you see this going? Where is this banking crisis headed?
First of all, anything that comes out of Biden's mouth or his spokesman are basically the ramblings of a senile corruptocrat, a liar, and an incompetent. Nothing he says matters. You can't bank on anything he says. You figure on the diametric opposite, if anything. Fortunately, and it's poetic justice, that these banks who got in trouble, especially Silicon Valley, but not the only one, are woke banks. Go woke, go broke. Go woke, go broke. I'm delighted to see these banks going broke. I only wish that their executives would be held accountable. But that won't be. They'll be protected the way Obama protected the banksters after 2008. That's just how corrupt the Democratic Party is. But that's the way it works. And Republicans as well, generally. But that's the way it works. It's international. Credit Suisse had to be given a $50 billion line of credit guaranteed by the Swiss government yesterday. It's not just America. As you say, it's China. Now it's Switzerland, which was the stalwart of banking security and responsible management. Now Credit Suisse is in problem, big trouble in Switzerland itself and in its foreign subsidiaries, such as Luxembourg, etc. It's Switzerland, it's the United States, it's the countries with supposedly strongest banking systems are in trouble. Additionally, if the Fed begins printing money, and that's the only way they can get it, begins printing money to bail out these banks, the value of the dollar is going to plunge, inflation is going to go higher and higher, and there'll be more and more pressure on the international community to junk the dollar as the basis of world currency reserves. That is what is happening. But I always look for the hand of God. What if in the Middle East, God is removing America from the Middle East to put hooks in their jaws, as somebody said, to bring about a Gog and Magog judgment on Russia and on Iran, and just destroy them on the mountains of Israel? What if that is what is happening? God is removing America for that very reason, so he can bring about his hand and his destruction. But moving on to the banking, it is not just America, it is global. The news of the Swiss credit bank yesterday should be as big, at least as big, as what happened in Silicon Valley, at least as big.
Jacob, let's not get too far ahead. We have the Credit Suisse, and you jumped a little bit out further
Sorry,
down,
did not
we'll
know.
forgive you. We'll
Did
forgive
not
you. No worries. Because Credit Suisse is about as woke as anybody. We'll show you some of the risk management, I guess, executive. He goes by a woman's name. But anyway, people knew this stuff, David Lister. People knew this stuff that was going to happen. Peter Thiel, the Israeli banks, they all pull out billions before this happened as SVB. Two Israeli banks pulled out $1 billion to protect their startups, tech startups, because that's what a lot of money was coming from. Peter Thiel, their own executives sold their stocks right before this happened. Some knew, some didn't know. The people didn't know. Bank runs the U.S. What a mess. And we're not done yet. As we said earlier, it seems to be the beginning. It seems to be a contagion that $150 billion that the feds have pumped in already, 150 billion with the B, has not solved any of it. This is the highest amount that they brought in. Even 2008 wasn't this high. 2020 wasn't this high. Crash the dollar, I suppose, introduce something new.
Could be, but they're just going to keep printing money. That's going to be just hurt America. But when we look at our banking situation, billions of dollars are flowing out of mid-sized banks into bigger banks.
Yes.
This is not being talked about much.
Yes, correct.
Billions upon billions. I happen to move my money out. So anyway, we're probably going to lose a lot of regional banks. The money that 30 billion that was put into Republic is still not enough to keep it from collapsing. It may be facing bankruptcy today, tomorrow, early next week. So it's almost like the plot is to have 4 major banks run American banking system. And these regional banks, all these banks were created in the 30s, and the FDIC would protect it. But there's no longer, a need to have regional banks because 98% of all transactions are done online. The young generation never even been in a bank, So the necessity of local banks is quickly fading. And so you're seeing there's billions, and not a lot of people are talking about it, are flowing out of them and into the major banks. So that's very concerning, because are we going to talk about the possibility of what's coming?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Let's go back to Credit Suisse. Jacob brought it up. The Saudis pulled out funding from Credit Suisse. They didn't want to touch it anymore. This too big to fail bank, as it was called, is having some major issues all across Europe. Their shares tumble about 30%. The Saudis own about 9.8% of that, and they didn't want to put any more into it. But some of the biggest decliners in France, Societe Generale, Banco de Sabadell in Spain, and Germany's Commerzbank are all facing the same thing Credit Suisse is going. And by the way, Credit Suisse, their director of credit and risk management, Philip Bones, otherwise known as his woman's name, calling himself Pips, P-I-P-S, who is basically a transgender. Who picks his directors, Jacob? I mean, you got the same thing in SVB, got the same thing in Credit Suisse. These rich risk management guys want to be woman. They want to be a woman. They're supposed to be protecting the assets of depositors, but they're more concerned about their own gender and their own fluidity. Women's clothing, wigs. He wants to be called Pips. I don't know. I guess we can call him something else, just inept.
Yes. Well, this is what we're seeing. This is what you're getting globally. Just look at the Biden administration. A transvestite sadomasochist was the nuclear czar. How sick can you get? Not only is that individual sick and depraved, Biden is sick and depraved. How sick and depraved can you get?
Oh, very sick and very
But the
depraved.
real people who are sick and depraved are people who will still vote for Biden. They are as sick and depraved as he is.
Canada.
If I may,
Go ahead.
real quick. So these people that they put in as the heads of risk management can't even base their identity in reality. Do you really think they're going to base loans and financial transactions based in reality?
Good point.
Now, risk management, right? So, Jacob, real quick, I don't want to go into it too much, but explain what a risk manager is supposed to do in a bank. I mean, they're supposed to deal with investments of depositors, which they're not supposed to be doing it, but in our system, they could take depositors' money and invest it somewhere else. How are they supposed to treat those investments?
There are three kinds of risk managers that the economy depends on. One are the actuaries in the insurance industry. They have to look at a multiple of factors to know what the insurance premium should be. It's something insurable, what the risk would be to the insurance company, and what it would do to rates for the other customers and so forth. So you've got the actuaries. Then you also have a kind of risk management that's only found in Chicago and London, basically, a bit in New York, which is the futures markets.
Yes.
These are people who manage institutional investment for companies that need certain minerals that are traded on the Chicago Board of Trade or something like that for their industries. That is how Westinghouse went broke. It didn't have enough uranium to fulfill the contracts for the generators it was building back in the 60s and so forth. And Westinghouse, which is a major corporate bankruptcy in the United States, went under. So those are a different kind of risk manager. And the third kind of risk manager is, of course, in fractional reserve banking. Remember, fractional reserve banking is precarious at best. It is like trying to balance a pencil in the middle on your finger. You might, or a pen, well, too much this way, too much that way, too much this way, too much that way. You got to get it just right. And that's how fractional reserve banking works. You've got to get it just right. But when somebody is worrying about if they have enough mascara on and if their wig is on straight, they've got other considerations rather than balancing the depositor's risks and the fractional reserve and the fractional reserve balances. I mean, it's a balancing game, and it's a high stake balancing game, and it can shift. It can very quickly jump from one bank to another. It can create a fear environment globally. They can go from one bank to another. So when you see an actuary, the reason they get paid a lot of money is because they're smart in statistical analysis. When you see a commodities trader, they get paid a lot of money because they don't mind having peptic ulcers. And when you see somebody balancing risk management and fractional reserve banking, now you're looking at a transvestite who's more concerned, about
pronouns.
Gender pronoun and woke culture and so on than they are about what they're doing, because they don't know what they're doing. Remember, under Biden particularly, they get their jobs not based on experience or qualification, but we want to have the first homosexual or the first Black or the first Asian or the first homosexual Asian. It's always something like that becomes the qualification or the replacement for the actual qualification. It's not ability or experience. In fact, they will even reappoint people who are with proven track records of failure, like Janice Yellen. That woman should be
Yes.
selling hot dogs on 6th Avenue and 47th Street in Manhattan because her intellectual ability doesn't go beyond that. But
That's an offense to hot dog vendors, Jacob.
Yeah,
That's an
yeah,
offense to
yeah.
hot dog vendors.
So,
Yeah.
if you're a hot dog vendor, I'm sorry for putting her in the same class with you. I'm sure she's not quite as bright as you are either. But yes, this is what you're dealing with.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, plus there's another thing that, to build on top of what Jacob's saying, we now have people pushing environmental agendas, pushing IPOs that require large transfusions of cash constantly for a period of time, 2, 3, 4 years before they even make a profit. So these environmental investments are large bits of money that are not going to pay out. Jacob is right. Cheap energy will solve the inflation crisis, all this, but all this environmental and other social concerns investing is not sound investment that we've had historically, but it's now a prejudicial investment that doesn't really care about your money. They're more concerned about the cause. And that is the transformational thinking that has happened and is now bankrupting America.
David is absolutely right. They don't care about the environment anyway. That's only a political ploy for them to manipulate stupid people. You had Biden's energy secretary, who knows nothing about energy, last week singing the praises of China's environmental policy. China opens a high sulfur, whole fueled electrical generator or electrical generation plant every 6 months.
Yeah.
And they're going to continue doing it well into the 2030s, they say. And this is who the Biden administration is pointing to as a model. They don't care about the environment. It's all a combination of lies and idiocy. Same with Schwab.
Yeah.
Same with
Yeah.
Schwab.
Yeah. ESG, environmental,
Yes.
social, and governance. That's the standard that they want for all these banks and all these companies, and it's going to destroy the economy. And guess who doesn't have ESG? Right? China doesn't have ESG. India doesn't have ESG. They move on and they have more
Either
investment
Saudi
in-
Arabia.
That's right. That's right. Now there is something going on in Canada, which, by the way, we need to dig in a little bit more. Maybe by next week we'll have the big five in Canada. They're also having trouble, and there's some major bank runs that are coming into Canada. So to prevent cash from being forced out of those banks, they're going to go into a heavy movement of convincing customers not to leave, incentivizing customers not to pull their cash out. But Canada has had legislation on moving to a digital currency anyway. So the system seems like it's about to collapse. The contagion is very real, and U.S. banks are on the hook for a lot of money coming in, trillions, as emergency money will be printed. The stocks are tanking, Jacob. The stocks are completely down on every bank. Bank of America is in debt, through the nose. Too big to fail banks. A lot of cash coming in. Janet Yellen, you mentioned her. She says they're resilient. Our banking system is resilient. I guess that's the new word for contain, like Bernanke said, the before the collapse of 2008, the banks are this risk is contained, but inevitably this is bound to collapse with that much money coming in. She says it's not going to affect inflation. It's not going to come out of the taxpayers' money. Does she think we're stupid?
She must, because she thinks we're stupid, that we don't recognize that she's stupid. But unfortunately, Joyce Behar is stupid. Whoopi Goldberg is stupid. These women on The View and those who watch it and people who think that way aren't stupid. They'll reverence her just because she's a woman, forgetting the fact that what she said about inflation was proved diametrically wrong, and she was forced to admit it. We got this wrong. Well, then why should anybody in their right mind pay attention to her now? But when you're dealing with morons, you're dealing with morons. People who watch The View are morons. People, who read the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost are morons. They might be educated morons, but they didn't learn much at Princeton.
Now, you guys remember that the Federal Reserve guy in Minnesota in 2020, Neil Kashkari, I think it's Kashkari. He says in an interview in 2020, don't worry about the ATM. So people were concerned at the 2020, what's going to happen to the banks and people needed money. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about ATM. We have, quote unquote, an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. Now that's going to go down in infamy. An infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. They're just going to keep printing to oblivion. David Lister, you had something to say.
But it won't be worth anything. You'll have
exactly.
The reason they have an infinite amount, all you have to do is write a program, zeros and ones, and create the cash out of thin air. So that's why they have an infinite amount. And it's, even Biden's budget, if you've just seen it, it's $50 trillion in debt. And plus we have more things coming that are really bad. They have trillions in credit default swaps coming anytime. I think April, if I remember right. Okay. This is going to be bad for the economy. See, we got problem upon problem. And Jacob, you talked about the actuaries and the life insurance. I talked about that a few weeks back, that they're having problems because their tables are wrong because of prime age deaths happening due to COVID and COVID vaccines causing early deaths.
Yes.
So that wing is hurting. The inflation, everything. It's a trifecta falling apart.
Well, let's understand the other factor as well. Banks in precarious times particularly will put their money into treasury bills. No matter what, no matter how capitalistic somebody is, they're still socialists when it comes to banking. Banks couldn't function without government debentures, okay? When you raise interest rates, which the Fed is forced to do because it's printing money, with quantitative easing, when the Fed raises interest rates, which it must do, bond yields are going to go through the basement.
Yeah.
And who holds those T-bills? The biggest holders are China and banks.
Yeah, and they're selling them. China's selling them. China's selling them like crazy.
So Saudi Arabia is not buying anymore.
Yeah.
And they're paying 4.5–7% to, some of the people on the financial shows are saying, hey, you can put your money there if you at least get 4.5%, but you're still going to lose money. And so, and especially if you can't pay them back, or if they do pay you back, they're going to pay you back with inflated dollars.
See, another thing is, if we had a president who was a patriot instead of a senile coward and an imbecile, we could stick it to China. I would litigate against China in American courts, saying you're responsible for Wuhan and the cost, and we are going to take your treasury bills and we are going to liquidate them as non-payable. This is how you're going to repay us. Not to mention the $3 trillion plus China owes us from the 1940s, pre-Mao, from the time of Chiang Kai-shek. I would just
payable in gold. Those are payable. That's payable in gold, actually.
In gold. I would just stick it to China. But of course, when you're on China's payroll, you don't do that to the boss.
Now, the end goal here seems to be central bank digital currencies. It can only mean one thing. The legislation is already there, both in Canada, both in the UK, both in the US, already done, just waiting for a crisis to happen. Am I too far to think that this is just going to be slammed through Congress in a very, very, precarious situation? Banks are falling, economy's falling. We need to get this through. This bill needs to happen. Legislation is already written. Basically, the government coming in and taking over the banks, taking over the assets of the American people, and just saying, we basically own your assets. and we're going to watch everything that you're doing. And but everything's going to be fine if you get the CBDC. You're going to have a 1-to-1 conversion, or maybe a premium will be given to a conversion rate. Especially if you're gay or something, or transgender, you'll get a little bit more than that. But is this where it's going? I mean,
Rand
we've
Paul's
seen
been
protests
saying
all over
this-
the world.
Exactly what you're saying, Marco, paraphrases what Rand Paul and his father, but Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, has been saying for over 2 years. It's exactly what he's been saying for over 2 years. And yes, the rhinos will vote for it.
Man, there's protests all over the world. France is protesting. They're reformed on pensions. There's tractor protests in Belgium, tractor protests. We've seen it in the Netherlands. We've seen that in the EU, there's protests against war. We've seen South Africa. They have some major blackout issues that are coming. People are protesting in Georgia, of all places. Antifa going into the police city in Atlanta. There seems to be protests everywhere. If the banks fail, are we going to see a major protest all over the world?
Look, it began with airlines not taking payment for duty-free on board with cash. That was a trial run, I suppose. Then it became, we want contactless payment to stop the spread of COVID. Okay, we don't want, that was the second. They've been building this progressively. It's been planned for some time. Ron Paul has been warning about it for some time. It's coming. And there's not enough people who have either the gumption or the intelligence to stop it.
No, I agree. I think Congress, like you said, they're going to rubber stamp this thing. David, we've been talking about CBDCs for some time. Financial crisis seems to be here, as the eternal words of the Obama's administration: "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." Do you see it happening?
It could easily happen. Like I said, you get rid of all the regional banks. You have 4 major banks left. Those will be very easy to work with the central banks over this. As far as monitoring people and monitoring their payments and monitoring their ATMs, very easy to do when you only have 4 players to worry about. Okay, you have they track all of us. In Canada, they've already tracked in the last crisis 33 million of the 38 million Canadians. Just yesterday's paper said that the CDC here in America bought so much information, phone information, to track us. So geofencing and geocoding all knows where everybody is. They have all the information on what you buy. So you want to go to the store and buy 50 pounds of rice? Well, we see for 3 months, you only bought 5 pounds a month. You're only allowed 5 pounds. They can tell you now what to do. And plus, if you remember, after the last bailout, I talked about the bail-in. We are now insured. Your money is now insured. It now belongs to the United States government. And so they can reach right into your bank accounts and take money out of it to help alleviate the crisis. They said when they passed these laws, in fact, Al was the Fed chairman then, and he said that there's no more bailouts, only bail-in. So they can go into your bank accounts, take 1/3 of it, and they'll only let you have ATMs. You know, they said the guy said, "Oh, your money saved $3,000." Well, maybe they'll let you have $75 a couple times a week. They can control your money. They can control your access. They'll be able to do what they want with this, and you'll either comply, and the Borgs will say resistance is futile.
So we've come this far. I mean, we've seen the experiments happening in Europe. We've seen the experiments happening in China, which is probably the most prevalent one. Now a crisis is here. Now the CBDC legislation, which was passed in Executive Order 1407 by Biden last year, it's rearing its ugly head again, just in time for a crisis. So geofencing, David brought up geofencing. Let's talk about that for a minute. By the way, we're going to be taking questions on Rumble. So welcome those who are watching us on Rumble. We're going to be taking questions there at the end on Backstage. We're going to be taking those questions. So if you start thinking of these questions, some of these topics, some of this eventually inevitable things are going to be happening. Seems to be Revelation 13, the Bible speaks about, very
Yes.
clear, almost to the degree what we're talking about, almost to the letter, that these things are going to be surveillance, hyperinflation, and no one's going to be able to buy or sell or trade without permission. Let's talk about geofencing surveillance for a moment. And what that is basically spying through your mobile phone, through your smartphone, through the network. And your phone hooks up to an antenna, a tower, a Wi-Fi, it pings. And people say, well, I'm glad I have a dumb phone. I have one of those flip phones. Well, unfortunately, it pings off a tower. They know where you are, even the most antiquated ones that our people have today. You have to go, even if you go satellite phone, well, the satellite knows where you are too. It seems to be a world that you can't really hide. Now, I'm going to bring up something real quick. Geofencing surveillance has been used by the government, specifically in January 6th. There's been people now, Americans, who are in prison because their phone rang off a tower, they pinged off a tower, a Wi-Fi signal, and they went to their homes and they found them guilty of being there without any charges. Just being there was enough to put them in prison. These people are still in prison, about 450 of them or so. It's the number that we can estimate. Geofencing was done. It's actually done by marketing companies. Companies know where you are. If you're nearby a store, they'll send you a coupon. It's a world that is interconnected and surveilled all the time. Now, I'm going to give you a real life scenario that happened to Christians. Happened at Calvary Chapel here in Santa Clara County, California. During the lockdown, Santa Clara County was one of the worst counties in terms of lockdowns. They said no one can go to church. Calvary Chapel opened their doors. They said no restrictions. People came in. Since 2020 and 2021, they've been tracking churchgoers into Calvary Chapel. $3 million fine was levied against Calvary Chapel by the county, which hasn't been paid yet, still there. But they went to court, and the court to say, hey, it violates the First Amendment. It violates, basically something that is essential for Americans, which is the First Amendment. So it undermines the First Amendment. So we can't let you do this. We can't let the county overrule the churches. However, since then, the Supreme Court of California did make a decision that although it was First Amendment violation, because it was used for national security or state security, or because it was under a state of emergency, police can use it, like January 6th, like in emergency situations. So even though it is a violation of First Amendment, you have courts already saying national security overrides those things, especially in an emergency situation. I'm going to start with Jacob. Jacob, this is by far probably the most clear scenario that, number one, they're tracking. Number two, Christians. I don't want to jump to conclusions. I think Christians are good at that sometimes, about jumping to conclusions, but I want to just keep it to the facts. They're tracking it and they're using it, specifically targeting Christians. It's weakening more and more, not only the rights in the First Amendments, but now it's going into places of worship. What scenario can you paint for us where this is going to be used against Christians, used against churchgoers, not just Christians, but churchgoers, used against anybody that it's in, let's say, in a scenario where they're not in agreement with the government, they're enemies of the state?
Well, tying it together with what David Lister said, let's understand, first of all, precedent. He mentions 4 banks. Okay, 4, maybe it might be 5. 4 banks. There are 4 banks in China that have a hand-in-glove relationship with the party and the government.
Wow.
The geofencing has been going on in China for over 18 months to 2 years. So the precedent has already been set. They're only imitating what China has been doing, and those technologies are actively used against Christians in China. Secondly, a corrupt government with corrupt politicians can always either create or exploit a crisis for their own political ends. For instance, the oil whore Bush administration, the political whoredom of the Bush dynasty and Cheney. Instead of security profiling Islamic passengers on airplanes, the way the Israelis do on El Al, they security profile Americans. They use it to take away rights of search without a warrant. Instead of profiling the high-risk people, which are Muslims, particularly Muslims from abroad, they continue the express visa program for Saudis to come into the country, but they begin to crack down or withdraw the rights of Americans. Corrupt governments, the Bush dynasty was a perfect example, but not the only one. They can always use or create a crisis to engineer what you're describing. That is the second thing. The third thing I would say in relation to your question, Marco, is that there is a global assault on democracy that is being satanically animated, specifically to destroy the body of Christ and ultimately to try to destroy Israel. This is absolutely the case. You're seeing movements in the United States against free speech, the Second Amendment, against rights of self-protection, defund the police, but you can't protect yourself either. Rights of search and seizure, all of these things are seeking to undermine the Constitution. You have Trudeau in Canada, who has basically flipped Canada from being a democracy to a non-democratic country. I don't believe Canada can be considered a democratic country anymore under Trudeau and his regime.
Oh, for sure.
Israel, judicial reform. This is a threat to Israeli democracy, in the opinion of many, many people loyal to Israel and of Israelis. Democracy is under global threat, but we know the hand of Satan is orchestrating it, and it will be used against the body of Christ, for sure.
Yeah, this was a pretty interesting case to me, and it was alarming to me what they did with Calvary Chapel in Santa Clara. And it was clear this is a battlefield that they've been doing. This was done in 2020, 2021. It's not new. It's just more open now. They don't care about it anymore, and they're just letting you know what they've been doing. And of course, some of the issues that they had is, of course, you're going against the state, you're going against the government. You can't worship on this day like many governors did here in California specifically. One of the issues that has come about because of this is in terms of where you see Christians opposing what the government and what they're trying to push is in the issue of transgenderism. And this is what they call transmania. Transmania in Minnesota, they passed a law. So the governor was on, and he passed a law that basically says it was going to safeguard transgender procedures for adults and for children. This is the law in Minnesota. It establishes that transgender people and providers can have basically carte blanche, and they will not be prosecuted. If they go to another state or anything like that, they will not be prosecuted in Minnesota. They will not be prosecuted if people come into Minnesota. So they're basically taking the hands off completely. Say, do whatever you want to the kids. The Democrat Lieutenant Governor, what is her name? Peggy Flanagan. She says, protect kids because we are gender affirming, and this is life-saving, health-saving by doing these surgeries to kids. Now she's wearing a shirt that had a knife. It says protect children, protect trans children, with a knife, basically a surgical knife. This is insane. She says the best way to be
insane, and it's demonic. But you know what? Day before yesterday, Biden said it. He said it's a sin to deny underage children sex change surgery. What about the consent of parents? No, that's a sin. And Harris has said the same thing about abortion. You know,
why did they use religious language like that? It's just crazy to make a spiritual issue.
They're demonically inspired to try to redefine Christianity as a religion other than biblical Christianity. Oh, we're Christians. Well, no, they are the false religious system of the world Christians. They're Babylonic Christians. Now, again, all of this flies right in the face of those misguided Christians who have been peddling this stupid, self-destructive garbage of pre-tribulationism. Persecution is coming. It is, in many cases, arriving. And they're still standing around babbling like clowns of things that are just not scriptural, that the early Christians never believed, and that they cannot defend exegetically, such as the pre-tribulation myth.
In
40%
California,
suicide
Go ahead.
rate amongst transgenders, 40%. And yet they are saying they're saving lives.
You're
This
saving
is how
lives.
disconnected they are
Yep.
from reality.
saving life. Jay, here in California, the assemblyman here in Norco, not too far from my house, AB 1314, is proposed to inform parents 3 days, have 3-day notice in writing that they are influencing their kids by either classes or they're bringing somebody in that's going to influence their kids into a sex or a gender other than their birth certificate one. That's a law. That's a bill that's being proposed. The Democrats here in California said, no, we don't like that. Scott Wiener basically vows to stop this bill, introduces his own bill that says almost criminal that if a parent decides to go against their kid's wishes, the parent could be held liable. This is crazy. It's AB 397, a crazy bill that the parents will actually be guilty for not supporting their kids. And they call it the anti-DeSantis bill. I don't know what DeSantis have to do with California, but they hate him so much that they're calling it the anti-DeSantis bill. And this is a childless senator from San Francisco, Scott Wiener, a childless senator telling parents that they have no rights over their sons and daughters. It's going to facilitate, he says, violence against children if they don't do this. Facilitate violence against children from who? Their parents? Anyway, he himself is a degenerate. He promotes butt plugs and all this stuff that it's just completely insane. And I don't want to talk about it here, but Scott Wiener is facilitating basically the destruction of children. Being a fellow California, Jay, what in the world are they doing to children here?
Well, children are always a financial responsibility of the parent to the age of 18 or when they move out. However, the state of California wants to have their cake and eat it too. Even though the parents are going to be financially on the line for the transgender surgery, for the many doctor's appointments, for insuring their kid for probably psychological treatment after they have the transition, all of this is a money-making scheme. Of course, Scott Wiener is in hand in glove with the pharmaceutical and the psychological institute, let's call it industrial complex that is pushing this. It's money. This transgenderism, it's about giving services and insurance for things that are unnecessary. And they want to do it to kids because kids, it's a lifetime of drugs, it's a lifetime of treatment, and it's a lifetime of medical services for 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 years.
And in a short in life, because of the many complications and the hormonal drugs, we don't even know what they do. They don't even know what they do over a long period. They've never been studied. So this new bill that is trying to protect parents won't be coming into law because the Democrats hold a supermajority in both chambers of the state legislature. So, and it's not going to go to the governor. We know that what's going to happen. It's David Lister. This is a new religion. This is a new religion of the left that bows down to the worship of Moloch and the worship of transgenderism, including what you saw there earlier. We watched a video of Drew Barrymore bowing down to a man who pretends to be a woman, Dylan Mulvaney, bowing down and saying, "Oh, you're so great, and kneeling in front of a man because why? She has to bow to the golden calf, and that's the idol that they twisted, and they made it. And of course, Mulvaney he's been wanting to be a transgender since he was 4 years old. To me, he's just a failed actor who never made it, and just capitalizing on the new identity to get more money and attention. But David, what do you think of this? I mean, this is absolutely insane. It's not just it's everywhere. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in Vermont with the basketball team that refused to play a girls' basketball team that has boys in it, and then they were banned. I mean, it just seems on and on and on. It goes against the very people, believers, Christians, and those who stand up against it. You can't stand up against the idol.
The kid in the Catholic school, he said God created two genders and they threw him out of the school.
Well, what's happening here, we certainly know, as Jacob said before, this is a demonically inspired religion. Molech worship is not new, but the father behind all this religion is, of course, the one whose job is to kill, steal, and destroy. The
Yes.
assault is full force on the kids. They're giving them no
Yes.
hope. And to the people that are listening to these scientists and financial advisors, are listening to people that can't even tell you what a woman is.
Mm.
So that's their medical experience. That's what they're thinking. But this is insanity. The whole pressure of this is to destroy children, to destroy their lives, to give them no hope. We're seeing 22% rise in female suicides among teens in just 2
Wow.
years. This is,
Unbelievable.
they're
isn't it?
doing their job. And people are listening to Satan when they're doing this. And what is happening is good is now being called evil, Isaiah's word, and evil is being called good.
Yes.
And they're villainizing people that hold to things such as the right of a parent to raise their own child in their own way and to raise them up and to follow after the Lord. They're on their full front targets. And so the assault is on, and may God help us for what's coming. I would tell, look, first off, I want to say this: God is sovereign. He sits over the earth and the heavens, and he's in charge. And he told us that this stuff would come, and that when we see these things, know that I am God, he said.
That's right.
So no matter what happens for us or to us, things will work out for us. For God is at work for God. I forgot it. Mia, help me. All things, thank you. All things work together for good to those that love him and are called according to his purpose. See, that's what happens when you get old, Marco. No laughing at me. You need a reminder.
Genesis 19:24.
So I use a shorthand of that. I say things work out for us,
That's right.
no matter what happens.
Amen.
Genesis
Jacob, what you got?
19:24. Just read it. Then the Lord rained on Hollywood and Sacramento brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all the valley and the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. His judgment is coming, and it's
Yes.
coming quickly.
Oh man.
The age of
Why'd you
grace-
say Hollywood? There's gonna be silver balls on my
Oh,
doorstep.
don't
now,
worry.
dude.
Don't worry. You get out of town with Lot and his family.
Okay, good.
We got you covered.
We got room out here, man. I got 55-foot garage. Come on out.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something real quick. We know children go through a really deep identity crisis during teenage years, a little bit before that. It's cruel beyond cruel to capitalize on children that are already having some difficult issues in a modern society, in an interfaith society where there's no clear reality of truth or God or anything like that. David, I wanted to ask you, Davey from Australia, I wanted to ask you, could you give just maybe some words of hope? Maybe there are some of those who are struggling, maybe those who are really, really seeking and asking questions, and they're realizing that, look, society's pushing them this way, but there's something about that reality that they're facing that doesn't let them go that way, and they're really struggling, trying to find answers. Maybe they won't go to church, maybe they won't even talk to me as a pastor or something like that, but maybe they'll watch a video on their own and really personally think about this. What could you give them as a hope? And it's in terms of what their confusion and they're really struggling with this.
Oh, okay. Well, look, I do know the one thing a lot of them really feel and struggle with is that basically nobody really cares, that they're just a commodity, as Jay was saying before, the whole trans thing is really about, it's a money-making scheme, because once we get you on, you know, hormones and medications, you're basically on them for life. And there's the surgeries. They're never really told what they're going to need afterwards, in terms of medical costs and all the rest of it. So getting back to your question, yeah, that is the thing. Most of them feel that nobody really genuinely cares. School counselors, they don't really care. They feel that with the churches, and they're right, because most of the churches here are that sold out, that they don't really care. Parents, unfortunately, it's sad but true. You know, they drop them off at daycare, they drop them off at school. Parents are basically allowing children to play the role of raising their kids. At least that's true here in this country. Parents don't play enough of an active role in the lives of their kids. I really do feel for the kids. I can understand why they're losing hope and why they're giving into suicide, drugs, depression, because reality is they know that where this world's heading, they see no future. They're getting lies pumped at them all the time. A lot of the kids, look, they can see through what's getting pushed on them at the school system too. But it's kind of like, if you speak up against it, you're going to everything's going to come down on you really heavy. The only hope for them really is in Christ, for them to come to know the Lord. And I really believe it comes back on us, that we have to get it right where others get it wrong. We need to look, one verse that's always helped me, you know, Christ loved us while we were yet sinners, you know.
Yes.
We need to come alongside these kids, really. We need to show care. Of course, they need the gospel, and we can give that in time, but too, they need to know that we actually do care about their souls, we care about their salvation, we care about their lives. These evil people, like that wicked woman before, just, you know, trying to push through, you know, protect trans kids and all the rest of it. We were talking about it earlier. When we grew up as kids, we used to watch cartoons and stuff like that. And the thing was always, you know, kids, don't try this at home. You know, we'd watch things like Superman, you know, and, you know, we were always told, kids, don't get up on the roof and jump off. If you jump off, you know, you've got the law of gravity. Well, these people are basically saying, oh, kids, look, you can do it. You can be Superman. You can jump off the roof. If you believe you're Superman, you're Superman. And just ignore gravity. These people, look, they need to be held account, and we know they will be held to account. Judgment Day is coming, and they're going to have to give an account. But there are a number of kids now too, and who've regretted the decisions they've made, and they want to detransition. That's starting to grow, the number of people who are wanting to detransition. Now, they're not getting support anywhere either. The government's not supporting them, because
they're shutting them down.
It's a costly process to detransition. If you want to transition to from one to the other here, government will bend over backwards for you here. You don't need your parents' consent. Daniel Andrews will make arrangements for you to be taken away from your parents so you can get the treatment that you need. Oh, that you want, not need. You definitely don't need it. But the thing is, there's nothing if you want to detransition. In fact, it's really hard. They don't get support from anywhere. So look, we really do need to be there for these kids as much as possible. We really need to show kids that, look, somebody does care. And look, the Lord loves you. The Lord cares. And yeah, my heart breaks for the kids. And I really, yeah, it's a battle. It really is a battle for them. I really feel for them.
Yeah, and I always think of you know, what the Lord said is he created a male and female.
Yes,
There's no confusion. God's not
and
confused.
you can be arrested for that now. You can lose your job for that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, God. And by the way, Jacob, you know, in New York, there's some teachers who were fired because they refused to attend a mandatory LGBTQ plus workplace
Yes.
training. And
Yes.
those teachers, even the courts, which I'm not exactly really for the Manhattan Second U.S. Court District of Appeals, because they rejected the claims that they were fired because of not attending the meeting. They said that they failed to show enough evidence. So these teachers are on the hook. They lost their job for not
Yep.
going along with it. These are Christians. These are
Yep.
Christian teachers in a federal court that they were not backed up by the federal court, and they were basically allowed to lose their job. This is the day of reckoning for a lot of Christians. To
Yes.
see where this is going, it should make you really aware
Yep.
and really
I
prayerful.
only hope our pre-trib brethren wake up to reality and stop believing nonsense. But in the meantime, I always look forward to the day when these judges will stand before the real judge.
Yeah.
And they're already guilty. They appear for sentencing.
Yeah, we have that Canadian pastor who was arrested again, Mr. Remer, was arrested again in Alberta, Canada, for standing up against drag queen shows and drag queen story hour. This is in Calgary, I believe, in Alberta, Canada, and he was arrested again in a parking lot.
Yep.
This is
Now,
second time.
you can have these transvestite homosexuals at your children, and they're protected. But if somebody says it's wrong at a parking lot away, he gets arrested. This is
Yeah,
what
this is
the naivety of so many Christians, thinking, okay, governments are God's ministers. Okay, they're supposed to be. But what happens when governments become the ministers of Satan and the police become the ministers of Satan, like the FBI are? Just
Yes.
ministers of Satan. You know, instead of ministers of the Lord. They're supposed to be ministers of the Lord. But what are you going to do? You're going to deny that the Roman emperors were demon possessed, that they were all bisexual, that they were all pedophile, that they all persecuted Christians? We can be in submission to those in authority unless their requirements force us to go against the commandments of God. And
That's right.
again, COVID was the beginning of that, when churches
Yeah.
divided over COVID.
Yeah. Jacob, I remember, getting emails and people even upset at that we weren't complying with Romans 13. This was the big claim to fame. You need to do this for the sake of all. And Romans 13 demands for you to be submissive to the government, et cetera. A misuse of Romans 13 for sure, but so many Christians bought into that. And they even were quoting the fact that, well, Christians throughout history submitted to wicked people like Hitler. They submitted to Nero and things like that. And I don't remember true Christians submitting to Hitler. Do you?
I know a case of a Jewish believer who I knew very dearly named Loti Nussenbaum. Her and one brother escaped. Both of her parents, both of her other sisters, and her other brother were all murdered by the Nazis. Her and one brother escaped via Belgium, and they made it into Switzerland. She gets saved in Switzerland at the age of 14. She gets saved at the age, after her whole family, except for one brother, has been murdered by the Nazis. She gets saved in Lausanne, Switzerland. And born-again Christians told her that Hitler is God's minister and she has to go back to Germany and submit to the authorities. Otherwise, she's not a true Christian.
Wow. Unbelievably sick. Unbelievably
True
sick.
story.
Well, did she go back?
No, she didn't. But some other believers talked her out of it, but they actually told her to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jacob, if you were the one or David were the one to tell me that you guys have seen pictures of Lutheran ministers or Catholic nuns taking little Jewish
Yeah,
babies,
sure.
turning them in.
Yeah.
I have photographs of it.
Okay,
Yep.
it was you. Okay, it was you. Okay,
We should
It's
put them up on our
unbelievable.
website.
that's a great
We
idea.
should.
Great idea. Because very much so, the woke churches are doing the same thing. You know, the Rick Warren churches, the woke churches, the LGBTQ churches, the environmentalism churches. They're saying, well, these Christians are not, they're not Christians. They're saying that they're not obeying the government. We need to submit to the authorities. A complete distortion of what the Bible says. But we're coming to the end of our catching up. We're going to be jumping over to backstage. So make sure you're sending your questions in on Rumble. We'll take them in on Rumble, put Jacob on the hot seat, and make sure you get your questions answered. David List, you got a quick thing?
One quick
minute.
thing, yeah. You know, somebody that told me that, read the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. We have inalienable rights from God, and these are formed in the first 10 amendments. And when a state, by obeying the Constitution and having the right of religion, the right of free speech, the right to defend yourself, these weren't from men, these were from God. And people that were saying what you were doing, Romans 13, they were out of bounds.
Yep. You know,
Out of bounds.
One
before
quick
we
thing
switch
from,
over, oops, sorry, James, go ahead.
one quick thing just like to say is I'd really like to see some of these Christians go tell Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego
That's
to read
correct.
Romans 13.
That's correct. That's correct. Meanwhile, I'd just like to encourage all of our viewers to please watch us on Moriel.tv, MorielTV.org, on Rumble or on some other platform. Don't watch us on YouTube. YouTube is only here as a feeder where we can
For a
point
while.
you to independent platforms that they cannot control. YouTube are not our friend. They are no friend of democracy. They're no friend of Judeo-Christian values. If we can use YouTube to point you to other platforms, then it has a viable purpose, but it has no other purpose. Please don't watch us on YouTube. Go to Rumble, go to Moriel TV, go to one of the other platforms available. But please don't watch us on YouTube.
Moriel.org has a Find Moriel. If you don't find a link, find Moriel on our website.
Please do.
All right. With that said, jump over to Rumble, jump over to Moriel.tv, Telegram, Vimeo, and you'll find us there on Backstage. We won't be on YouTube. We won't be on Facebook for that particular reason. We're jumping off because, like I said, our tech overlords don't want us to talk about. One of the things we're talking about Israel, talk about aliens. Find us there, Backstage. We'll see you guys in a couple of minutes.